All right, let's go ahead and start. Good morning. Thank you all for joining us today for Pangea's Community Cafe. I'm Pramod Shentry and your host for today's cafe. Before we start, I'd like to remind everyone that the cafe is for the community, and we encourage everyone to post any questions they have in the chat area. We'll have Q&A at the end, and we'll make sure to answer all of your questions. So on the call today, I'm excited to introduce Fawad Shaikh, CEO of Candle, and Pranav Shikarpur, our dev advocate here at Pangea. A little background on Fawad. He started his career as an IT security consultant at PwC. Since then, he's worked for companies such as Akamai, IBM, and Very Good Security. Since last year, April of 2022, he co-founded Candle, and we're looking forward to learning more about you, Fawad, and your journey at Candle. So glad to have both of you join us. How are you doing today, Fawad?
Yeah, I'm doing excellent. Thank you so much for having me here. I love, just getting to the developer community. I think that it's definitely a fun community. There's a lot of diversity of opinions here. And so I love engaging, with the developers because we're building the future, right? Like, that's truly what we do.
Great. Yeah, I was looking through your background and I noticed that you have a business background, and then you moved into tech. And by the way, hook 'em horns, right?
That's right. Yeah, hook 'em.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Can you describe that jump from your kind of business background into security and tech?
Yeah, I have always been in tech, right? When I was like 8 years old, we got our first computer and at my house. And so I have been infatuated with technology and the power of computing and computers since I was very young. And when I was starting high school, I was 14 and we had kind of like a computer, uh, it was like a computer repair class, really. And I was like, yeah, I'll be working with computers. That's what I want to do when I grow up. And so I always knew I would work in computers. And then came college. And this was at the tail end of the dot-com burst. And so I was advised by effectively anybody with a brain. I was like, no, technology's dead, right? You don't want to work with computers. Go into finance, right? And so what I did, I went to UT. I went to the business school there. And that's what I told my parents. So, yeah, I'll go study business like you want me to. But what I actually did was I studied business information systems, in which was a combination of, fundamental understandings of business, but also applying IT and software development into that. And so, yes, I had a business background, but it's more as a cover to hide who I truly am, and that is through and through a technology enthusiast.
Well, you've clearly had a great background or a journey here. I see that you started in security right out of the gates when you were at PwC. Can you walk us through your background with security and your journey there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I left when I finished college. I thankfully got a job. Very excited about that. But the job I got is a job, I have children now and I tell them, they're like, no, you didn't do that. And I did. I was a white hat hacker that I would get paid to go and into different large businesses, names that, you deal with every day, and try to show them how soft and gooey and easy it is for anybody to hack into their critical systems. And, one of the crowning achievement of every assessment, that's what they called them, was to get a screenshot of, like a VP or a CEO or somebody's emails, right? And say, hey, we were able to go and read effectively all of this person's emails. And, I really gained a lot of understanding of the way that software isn't just, one application, and how it's really part of the network. It's part of the ecosystem that runs a business. And that one vulnerable application can lead to havoc because everything's interconnected in an email server, right? And so we would gain access to an application through something like SQL injection and then end up reading somebody's email, right? That's how far the permissions take you. And so really that started my fundamental journey into security and trying to figure out how do we make this world more secure and less soft from the security perspective.
Yeah, I mean, that's white hat hacker. I've heard of like red teams. Is that right? Is that?
Yep.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Very similar. A lot of time red teams are internal.
Okay.
And so you have your own internal team and their job is to go and do vulnerability and threat assessments against different technologies. But so there's black hat hacker and white hat. Black hat means that you do hacking for personal gain or monetary gain. Right. And white hat hacking is you do it to try to make things better and say, hey, here's how I did it. And, a common white hat hacker now is, with the hackers that do the bug bounties, things like that.
Could I interject with a question? What was the coolest thing you found while in your white hat hacking career? Is there anything you exposed at the company that the execs were like, oh my God?
There was something extremely scary that I didn't want to find, and thankfully I didn't cause damage. I was at a hospital, and one of the things was that the hospital had their own credit union, and I got into their credit union's master database, and I could have been able to just adjust values freely in that little credit union. But that wasn't the scary thing there. The scary thing there was that they had their life support machines on the network. And I inadvertently got into one. And had I been careless, that could have resulted in malfunction in the machine and potentially hurt somebody or worse. And so that was really scary.
Wow.
Yeah, things that you don't think about until too late.
Yeah, I mean, not to go into too much more detail there, but I imagine they were able to fix that based on your.
You know what? That was the one part that was not satisfying about my job is I would deliver a report and then I usually wouldn't hear back, right? And so I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know how well they heeded my warnings.
Fair enough. Well, let's fast forward to now, right? Again, want to thank you for the LinkedIn contribution, talking about WASM, hexagonal architecture, how you've integrated Pangea service into the Wick platform. But yeah, please let's talk a little bit more about Candle and what you're up to today and what the
yeah. And so thanks for kind of bringing up kind of like my past, because that's really what shaped my entire career and eventually the goal at Candle, right? And I kind of mentioned how I was able to take a vulnerable application and use that to gain access to the rest of the network, right? And that is the key, right? That's the little pivot that I got so fixated on, was like, why am I able to do that, right? Like that's crazy that I can just take like, oh, okay, there was a SQL injection vulnerability and use that and take it all the way into getting full access of a network. And really what it comes down to is the egregious amounts of permission that code is given access to to do its job. That when you run software never asks, hey, should I do this or can I do this? It just does it, right? And that permission is what leads to the vast majority of attacks, right? It's like Log4j, for example, happened because you were able to send a payload that would execute something on the system, right? The vast majority of Java applications don't execute anything on the system. Why was that permission and capability there anyways, right? Like that fundamental capability is exactly the same capabilities that I used, back in the day to get from SQL injection to server control, right? Like that the application never needed a way to run a command on the system, but it had it, right? The application never needed the capability to talk out. We used Netcat at the time, right? So what I would do is I would open up a port locally, and then I would go onto the server because I could run system commands. I would Netcat, which is a utility to make network connections in and out, and I would do a connection back out to my remote server. And now I have full SSH control over your box, right? So I'm not doing things through SQL injection anymore. Now I can just do LS and navigate your directory and your shared mounts and all of this, right? And the application did not need access to make egress calls to random endpoints on the internet. And so like, that's the problem that we're solving at Candle. We're solving the excessive levels of permission that all code is given to do what it doesn't need to be able to do. And so focus on what the code needs to be able to do and don't let it do anything else. That's fundamentally what Candle's all about.
Wow, that's great.
And so you mentioned WebAssembly. WebAssembly is our vehicle to do it, right? Like I love WebAssembly and I love talking about it, but I think about other companies that have tried similar things in the past, and one of them is Docker, right? When you mention Docker, you're like, oh, it's a container, right? No, Docker is a Linux kernel, not kernel, but a Linux implementation, right? That's what you're doing when you make a Docker container. Is you're making like a Linux image, right? But no one thinks about it that way, and that's what I love about the developer experience of Docker. And I want to replicate that Docker. When someone does it, I'm making a Docker file. They don't think, I'm making a Linux image. And with WASM right now, it was like, I have to make a WASM image and everything is WASM. It's like, no, don't think about WASM, right? I just want you to think about, I'm making a component, right? I'm making a software component. And WASM I love all the details around it and how it enables us to give a sandbox and security and permissions and control. But like, that's Candle's problem, right? That should never be the developers. Go ahead, Pranav.
Yeah. So, just to take a step back here, I'm a developer myself. And for the longest time, WebAssembly has always been, one of those cool kids around the block. And only, it's been, a high barrier to entry to learn, similar to languages like Rust for me and stuff like that. I was curious to know, to kind of tell our viewers, what is WebAssembly at a high level? Where would you use it? And why is it more advantageous than writing programs in other languages? If you could.
Yeah, absolutely. So WebAssembly was initially designed to be an eventual replacement to JavaScript on the browser, right? And so JavaScript has a great sandboxing model that we all enjoy. Otherwise, all of our machines would be completely compromised right now. Is that effectively what we're doing every time we visit a website is that we're running some stranger's code on our device, right? And we're pretty comfortable that that code in itself is not going to be able to harm us. There are some downsides though to JavaScript, is that, it's a little bit slower than other compiled languages. and being able to do things that are more computationally intensive are things that are really outside of the realm of JavaScript. And so what WebAssembly was doing was that it allowed you to write code in more performant languages like C and Rust and Go, and take that same compiled application and run it inside of a web browser, right? Where it enjoyed all of the benefits of the code sandbox, right? And the sandboxing was what was really intriguing to me and a few other companies out there who I was inspired by, that this showed that code could be compartmentalized and still provide value. That this code did not have the egregiousness of permissions that I previously was discussing, yet it could still provide value. And so what we're doing at Candle, what's kind of novel about us, is that we're saying, look, here's how you take existing pieces of WebAssembly compiled modules and putting them together to create something more in a reusable fashion. And so the same WebAssembly that could potentially be running on your website and is providing some functionality there could run maybe on a local CLI application or on your machine or on your server somewhere for some server-side needs. And so we're taking WebAssembly and using WebAssembly as Lego pieces, and we've built that standardization model to say, here's how you take Lego pieces of code and put them together in a way that two pieces will always connect just as Legos do. And I hope I'm not like breaking any trademarks by mentioning that company who with the squares.
I think you're good, but moreover, coming from, I come from a web developer background, what are the advantages, and I don't know if this is the right question to ask, but what are the advantages of building, something like a web app with WASM over building something with, for example, I just take React and JavaScript and I'm running it like that, right? So what are the advantages I get with it from a security perspective, from a development perspective, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah. So I think that security is fundamentally like the key value from running it on the backend. NPM and Node is one of the most egregiously hacked package managers out there, right? Like every week we're hearing about supply chain attacks on it through NPM, from abandoned repository takeovers and really just long-term advanced persistent threats, right? Like malicious users will make a library and wait until it gets popular and then do something. And this could be years in the making. Like we see like state governments, that are doing things like this. I have a few friends who work at Mandiant, and they tell me some crazy stories about things like the level of effort that some of these hackers do and the amount of time that it takes to really do that. And really all it does is just validate my thoughts right around, okay, like this would never happen if your backend didn't expose all of your environment variables to every single function call, right? Like, and so the security, absolutely, but then the reusability, right? Like you can't take the same code that you wrote and now run it on your backend, right? Like the front end has its own code, backend has its own code, and never the two shall meet, right? You can't, even though it's JavaScript, you can't take your Node.js code and run it in the browser, right? And that's really what WebAssembly does unlock, is you can, right? You can take your code from the browser and run it on the backend.
Interesting. So just to kind of understand, so you're saying, I mean, I'm not sure if this is the right question, but I have, like, for example, I have a middleware file and I can run that in the browser and I can run that on the server as well. Can I do that in JavaScript? What advantage does WebAssembly give me here?
Yeah, and so like an example there would be something like an image. Well, let's say you have an image manipulation library, right? That's something that you wouldn't do for performance reasons in JavaScript, right? So you take an image and I'm gonna change the coloring or do whatever, some sort of manipulation to this image, cropping and resizing. And so this would be something that you would receive. You would make a backend API, you would receive it, you would execute that, and then you would send it back. And you and your server have done all of the heavy lifting here, right? And what WebAssembly allows, because it allows for more computationally intensive languages, languages that can make use of a local GPU, for example, to be sent to, a phone, right? Like my phone has extremely powerful processor, and that WebAssembly could run on the end user's device, do the image manipulation on the end user's device, and return it back, right? Like that's what edge computing and the future of computing is all about, is that like we don't want to backhaul 4K images back and forth over the internet every single time, right? We want to make each of the devices part of our compute model so that they can do it. But again, without that sandboxing, no one's going to be comfortable running your code, right?
Yeah. That's actually that's a very cool concept. I think, codifying that into an example was like really helpful, because I remember seeing somebody trying to run Llama in the browser, the language model, and that was pretty cool. Anyways, but would you like to, I know you have a demo that you would like to show us all about this new tool that Candle's built called Wick, which is supposed to be super simple, which makes it super simple to use WebAssembly. So do you mind just talking about that, and obviously going through the demo? We'd love to see it.
Yeah, let me just pull up my demo here. And so let me know if you guys can see my screen okay and everything's clear.
Zoom in a bit on the terminal of the code so we could just see it.
Okay. Let's see.
Just us.
Okay. All right. Is that a little bit better?
Yeah, it's a lot better. Yeah. All right. I think Keith said increase font size. I don't know if you can do that in the editor itself.
It looks bigger than it did yesterday. Yeah. It looks like you have increased the font size.
All right. Is that better?
All right. Yeah, we can see it.
All right. Great. So Keith, is that good for you?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay. Excellent. All right. So, if you may or may not have kind of read the blog, what we reached out, or what we needed Pangea for, was that we were building our cloud offering to let people run our Wick applications on our servers. And one of the things that we wanted to do was to make sure that we were only servicing known countries that didn't have any sort of like technology blacklist against them, right? And so right now, like you can't provide compute services to Iran and Russia and North Korea, and so I needed a way to kind of make sure that in case somebody does that I would know and be able to stop that. And so I started looking around to say, okay, like how do I integrate IP geolocation services into my application? And that's where I came upon Pangea, and I do understand you guys have a number of other really cool components, but this one was the one that I needed for my use case. And after I got done implementing it, it was just really straightforward, and so inspired me to kind of write that blog. But this is what I'm showing right now, right? Is the heart of the Wick programming framework, right? Is that fundamentally we want to make sure that any type of egress connection is strongly defined and controlled. And so we say that there is an IP geolocate component, and here is the path to it. Here's the headers that it needs and the body. And so what this means is that these are all runtime configurations, And so the application, the code, has no idea of these root config values, right? The only thing that code can put in and change about this is the IP address, right? And so what this does is that there's no way that the code can be exploited to extract what my authorization token is, right? There's no way for the code to make a request to any other path other than v1/geolocate, right? Some of the things that I was able to do in my hacking days, those are the things that I'm trying to stop here. That's that this can't make an arbitrary connection to an arbitrary URL, right? And so that's really the heart of it, and shows kind of, I think, to highlight some Pangea use cases, just how simple it is for an API to say, hey, give me some IP geolocation information. I didn't have to go and implement some weird library inside an Nginx controller somewhere and figure out how to do that, because that's the alternative. Right? It's like,
yeah. So this kind of enables, prevents a user from just injecting a fetch function that just hits another URL. It gives that fine-grained access.
Yeah, it gives that fine-grained access, and then what it does is that then we can take this same component and use it anywhere. And so in my blog, I used it in two separate ways. One, I made a middleware, and the middleware is what we're actually using in production, that it is used as a proxy between our application and the internet. And so it's part of our ingress path that all requests go through this middleware. And what it does is that it adds a header. And I kind of made an image of this flow of between different WebAssembly components, of which Pangea is one, is that the request comes in. Let me make this a little bigger. The request comes in. We get the IP address of the client. We use Pangea to get the country code of that IP address. And then we append that header to a request. And so I set up there's a Docker Compose file, and all of this code is available in GitHub, and so and part of the blog. So if people are aware and want to look, but fundamentally, right, I just showed that I made an HTTP request, and I'm able to append a Pangea country code to it, right? And that's using fundamentally this one same component that's being compiled on the back end to WebAssembly, because people shouldn't need to know that it's WebAssembly. It is, right? But this is not writing WebAssembly code, right? And then what I did was I said, you know what? I want to make it a CLI app. And so I just changed my flow, right? A few lines of code here. And I said, okay, cool. I'm going to turn this into a CLI app. And so then I did a Wick install.
I don't think we can see it. Do you mind clearing your terminal? Sorry.
Sure.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
So I did a Wick install, and that installs this as a CLI binary called geolocate. And then I do geolocate, and it says, okay, here's the geolocation of this IP address. And again, it all just comes down to just this one simple this one simple HTTP request, and using our kind of flow-based programming syntax to manipulate it to be either a CLI app or a middleware app. And this component is unaware that it's running on my client, unaware that it runs on a server. It just works. And this is how easy it was to turn Pangea into a building block, so that now any application that I build in the future can run through this Pangea proxy, or I can just embed this Pangea component directly into my application.
Pretty cool. So it kind of fits in as like modules that you can pull from like the Wick Candle registry.
Yeah, and just being able to extend this. Let's say I wanted to log anytime, do an audit log anytime this event occurred. Then I would have an operation here for the Pangea audit log API, and I would just add one more block here in my flow that said, okay, get the IP country code, and then here where it says maybe drop, change that to log, and log that now to Pangea. And so we're really trying to simplify software development while making it more secure, because it's only through security and secure software that you're actually going to be able to have a business that's sustainable.
Yeah. No, that's great that you brought that up. I mean, I've been building a couple of Golang CLIs, and man, every time I get an input, I'm so scared about like what kinds of stuff the CLI has access to. And today we're in a world where we're installing a ton of CLIs, so it's weird to have like function level access to stuff.
Yeah, and so I just wanted to kind of show that, I installed the CLI from this, and this is our version of NPM, right? Like this is our code repository. And what I can instead do is I can run an audit against this component and say, hey, what resource does this component have access to? And if this component only has access to this, right? Here, like if it was accessing some other URLs, it would list those other URLs and which of these subcomponents is accessing, right? And so this one I know is, okay, this is only accessing this one URL, and that's the only validation I need to know. I don't need to look through, like these source files of Rust code to be like, hey, like, is there another fetch call here or something like that? No, it doesn't matter. It's all exposed at the very front. And then we have a capability called lockdown that you can actually create a lockdown file that says, hey, this is exactly what I want to let access to. So even if this were to change over time, the runtime would then reject that request and say, hey, this is no longer the URL that this function had access to. And so I'm rejecting this function from making that other access.
Wow. This is very powerful and very cool. But could you kind of give us an overview of how a developer could get started with using Wick? Because I mean, I'd love to get this integrated in my app. So yeah.
Yeah. So really, like Wick, when we had to build it, we effectively had to make it so that it can be almost a full programming language, right? So, and that's fundamentally what we built, is that we've built an entire framework for end-to-end software development. And so how you get started, you just go to candle.dev/docs, right? Like you get started. But, I may be biased based on my experience, but the easiest way to get started is, do you want to host a static website? Because that's something that's extremely easy to do, right? All you need to do is you make a file similar to this, right? You can just come and copy and paste it. And we have some examples that show that you can literally copy and paste. And you can be serving static websites through a cloud. And then very easily through middleware components, add Pangea functionality. Like this is literally what you have to do, is just say, okay, let's do this enriched request middleware. Or if you go to our examples, you'll see some authentication, right? If you wanted to add OAuth or basic authentication, those are just components that you just add as middleware to your application. And so start with a static app, right? Just see how easy it is. You don't have to mess with Nginx configs and all Docker files and all of that. Like it's all gone. Just start something simple and you can build REST APIs, and we have all the documentation and we provide SQLite actually on our cloud, and you can build a full API backend, and we'll even host your front end all on the Candle cloud, and you can integrate it directly using these components to the Pangea API to add security functionality into your apps.
Great. Hey, Fawad, I had a question around persona of the developer that would use this framework. We talked a little bit about that.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah. Like, and that's always been something that I've been very passionate about, is that it's not about the developer, right? It's actually about the idea, the person with the idea, the organization with the idea, right? Like every one of us who is a developer knows 10 friends who have great ideas, or think they do at least, right? And they say, hey, I have a great idea, right? And then they come to the developer to say, can you implement this? And just putting yourself in that position makes me feel like, wow, like these are people who need to be empowered, right? These are the people who are being held back from being able to give the value that they see in the world, the missing component, right? In the world that they think that they can impact. And I want to give them a platform to take their ideas and take my Lego pieces and build with it, right? Take everyone's Lego pieces and build your dream without having to be like, oh, I am not able to be a programmer, so I can't do this, right? And that's fundamentally what this is all about, right? Like security, blah, blah, blah. Like that's not my passion. My passion is that I want to get people empowered to make the world a better place.
Yeah, yesterday when we were speaking, you had talked about really targeting and making it easier for the app creator to bring their ideas true, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, essentially Pangea, I mean, our platform, security has always been kind of the afterthought, but now with this secure by design approach, it's, making it easier to secure your app as you design, right? So
yeah,
again, a lot of parallels.
Yeah.
This is great.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's like we're tackling kind of like the two separate areas of the problem, right? Like I'm targeting from a more technical perspective on what happens inside of a computer, but you guys are adding kind of like that protective shell of capabilities on the outside to say, okay, well, here's how you can know that things coming in and going out are good or bad, and preventing even, like through your redaction and vault and file scanning. Now I saw, just it's like, hey, like you don't want these things in here, right? Because like Wick's not going to be able to do that. Any programming framework, you're not going to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And let's stop reinventing the wheel.
Yeah, one of the other things, getting up and running, it sounds like it's super easy getting up and running on Wick platform. I mean, would you say, ultimately this is reducing time for the developers to ship to market?
Yeah. And so if you go to our website, like, one of the things that we put up there, like as one of our mission statements, is that we want people to be able to deliver production at POC speeds, right? And again, like from a software development perspective, software developers love doing POCs and they hate getting their code ready to be shipped to production, right? And we want to just take that and make it feel like they're just writing POCs, but that code that gets delivered, we're going to add all of the logging, all of the telemetry, all of the security, all of the nuances that make it painful to deliver to a reliable production environment. We take it and we make that part easy, right? And so build your POC, do it on Wick, because once your POC is done, your application is ready for production.
That's great.
Does the Candle does the Candle website run with Wick? Just curious.
It does. Yeah. So everything we do, even our cloud platform, everything is powered by Wick, right? We are huge into kind of eating our own dog food, right? If we can't use it, that means no one else can. And so every single thing that we do, we use it ourselves.
That's great to see. I mean, even we at Pangea use a lot of our own services for our internal stuff. So yeah, I mean, that's how you build secure by design products. Yeah.
That's great. Verlaine, welcome. It looks like we've got a question from Verlaine.
Yes,
Yeah, why don't you go ahead?
I have a question. How networking engineers can use Wick, especially for people who don't have a web development background?
Yeah. So again, the goal is to try to empower people, right? And so a lot of our syntax is written using our flow-based language, right? And so that YAML file that you saw, if you can compose YAML, you can do things in Wick. And so if you look at our examples, you'll see examples of the only knowledge you need to have is writing YAML files and writing some SQL statements, and you can make a database-backed application using Wick and add authentication to it and add Pangea to it. And so we are not targeting software developers. We are targeting, as I said, people who want to build software.
Great. I just put out a note in the chat area to ask any questions, so please add any questions there. One thing I wanted to ask, again, Verlaine, was that a good answer to your question, or did you want to add anything?
Yes, I am satisfied. I'm satisfied.
Fantastic. We are in our final weekend with our hackathon, which is around health and wellness. So again, fintech and health tech. September 18th is the final day for submissions. But Fawad, do you have any use cases for the Wick platform in the area of fintech or health tech?
Yeah, so Wick is really an any-to-any platform, right? And so what that means is that we're not saying, oh, we only do backend or we only do front end or we only do HTTP, right? Like our goal is that, you want to make a cron job, do it in Wick. You want to make an HTTP server, fine, do it in Wick, right? We're actually working on some email relays, right? Because that's something that people still use, right? But it's taking all of the technology, email, web, cron, time, right? And then running that same exact executable against it, right? And so I want to say I'm industry agnostic, right? Like anyone can use me. Anyone in any place can use me. But especially if you're in finance or health, right? And you have all of these regulatory needs and security needs and audit needs, it would behoove me for someone to not be investing in a security first development framework, right? And that's, the cost of a breach is not only the pain that it may cause to your customers and end users, but the financial and reputational cost of that happening to your business could end your business. And so can I do something special that no one else can do? Yeah, from a reputational perspective, that's really what we're targeting, is that people who need to care about security and have security be number one or one of the highest priorities that they have, that's who I really want to reach. And that's who software for fintech and health tech really is lowering their compliance burden so they can focus on shipping value and not on shipping security.
Oh, that's great.
To dive a bit deeper into that question, I know you have worked in you work for a healthcare company, is what you mentioned before as a white hat hacker. So if you were to give an inspiration of an idea or two about what you would possibly build with Wick and Pangea for the hackathon, do you have any ideas in the healthcare space or in the finance space?
Yeah. So especially in the healthcare space, one of the things, is the medical records, right? And I know that there's a lot of a lot of people that are eager to use like ChatGPT and things like that, right? And one of the use cases that we've been toying with is integrating AI using Wick as a control plane to limit the amount of information that can come in or go out of the system. And so making it so that you can have a kind of chatbot that would be able to privately and securely give you a summary of a patient's entire background based on the notes that they have. That's absolutely something that, you know, we can enable with Wick in a very secure way. And with Pangea, I would throw the audit logs up in there, right? And say, hey, here's every single request, every single person that was requested, and every single data point that was requested, and then I'd redact information on anyone doing any type of cross customer analysis to say, or patient analysis, not customer, on, hey, like what diseases, you know, are most prevalent in the past 30 days for our patients, right? And yeah, like I think that there's a lot of cool things that we can enable.
And you could just plug these in as middleware, I assume. Just the way you showed us how we could do the geolocation.
Yeah, exactly. Is that you would just plug in a HTTP request and you would plug in a component for a vector database, right?
Yeah.
And you're good to go. You're off to the races.
That is very cool.
Yeah, this is great, Fawad. You know, we've learned a lot about you today, and I want to thank you. You know, it's starting from your days as a white hat hacker to your journey at Candle, where you're making it easier for app creators to ship their apps to market. You know, also learning about the importance of securing your app and how Pangea can make this happen, right? And you know, again, we've had this hackathon going on for the last month. We've seen some great submissions. We'll look forward to seeing more come through this weekend and in through Monday. But again, you know, want to thank you. Is it okay to share your LinkedIn URL?
Yeah.
The audience here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Let me put it in the chat box if they want to connect with you directly. And
yeah, we'll also put this on the recording that goes up. So yeah.
And also candle.dev is your website if they want to visit there. But, you know, I think listening to you and talking about kind of your goal and what really got you here to Candle, I mean, essentially is what we're doing here at Pangea, right? I mean, you hear, you know, Oliver, our CEO, in some of his interviews of why we created Pangea. And that is, you know, when you're building companies over and over and over and you're having to redo the same set of security features over and over and over, why can't this just be turnkey? And that's really where our security platform comes into play, really making it easier for developers to use with just one line of code, be able to bake in features. And again, similar to what you're doing, helping them ship to market faster, a secure app. So a lot of great parallels here. You know, do you have anything you want to share with the audience, you know, kind of lead them with, before we close?
You know, I don't want to think that what I have to say is that valuable, but honestly, you know, I think that I may be biased, but security and productivity is not mutually exclusive, right? And embracing that is what I think is going to get us to a more trusted future. Yeah, where we are more comfortable sharing our more personal bits of information with technology, such as our healthcare information. And so if we want a better future, we need to embrace security so that we can make it happen.
It's great. Great piece of advice. Well, with that, we'll bring it to a wrap. And I want to thank everybody who joined the call today. And yeah, here we go.
Thank you all. Yeah, thank you for joining. Thanks, Fawad. Thank you for your
Yep. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Pranav.
Bye.